podcast.
People ask me all the time about the ads I have on here. It's usually one of two things. One, how the contracts work. And the other is, are you reading a script? How do you do the scripting for the ads? How do you time everything so the music ends when the ad is done? And the answer is, the music comes in afterwards. The words that you hear, I'm working from bullet points. And I just got a new set of bullet points from Lisa at riverside.fm. We're going to go through them together. So kind of break that wall. You're going to see, before I get too comfortable with them, what it sounds like. That is coming up. It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. If you want to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast that sounds better, make a podcast that people care about, make a podcast that makes you money. You are in the right place. Bigpodcast.com. That's the website. My name is David Hooper. I've been doing this forever. Started radio in the 90s. I spent 20-something years in the music industry. And this run, podcasting and syndicated broadcast, I have done it for 20 years. So I've been at it for a while, helping people like you. I've got a weekly newsletter. It goes out every Friday morning, New York City time. This is the audio edition of that newsletter. And this is what we're talking about. Marvel Universe versus podcasters. Sonic Dash, a 48-hour podcasting contest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strategies for podcast expansion. Useful and overlooked skills from podcasting. 22 Pixar rules for podcasters. Also some classified ads, things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast that people care about. The things that this podcast is about. This episode of Build a Big Podcast brought to you by riverside.fm. Studio quality recordings anywhere. I'm going to break the fourth wall for you, as I just mentioned. I got the talking points right before I stepped into the studio from Lisa at Riverside. She said, "Hey, David, there's some new stuff at riverside.fm. Mention this in the ads." I said, "All right, check this out. We're going through this together." There's now a silence remover and filler word removal tool. This is AI-powered. It's a real time saver for podcasters. Riverside's one-click AI feature can automatically remove long silences and filler words like and ah from your recording. It's going to give you a polished, professional sound without hours of manual editing. Live streaming and audience interaction. Riverside also supports live streaming to platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So you've got something for people who want to watch and participate with you as you're recording, and also something like this podcast that listeners, viewers can consume on demand. With Riverside, you can now record, stream, and edit all in one place. It's the only platform podcasters need to produce high-quality content quickly and efficiently, no matter where you are. Talked about this before. I'm in Nashville. I got somebody in Los Angeles I need to talk to. No problem. Australia, no problem. London, no problem. Maybe time zone's a problem, but not getting high-quality audio. If you want to check it out, this is the way to do it. Go to riverside.fm. They're going to give you a couple of hours. You can try all of these things, all these new features that I'm talking about, and all the old features that Riverside is known for. High-quality audio and video, editing via text. Everything they've got, you can look at it for a couple of hours, see if it works for you. If you want to stick around, here's a discount code. It's going to get you 15% off. The discount code, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. That's riverside.fm. The discount code to get 15% off. Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. It's as easy as that. Let's get to the news. I'm going to go from thing to thing to thing. And because these things are all about podcasting, sometimes it's difficult to tell when I've gone from one thing to the next. Because of that, you're going to hear this sound. That's how you know I'm done. If you want more information, if you want the links, if you want to see what I've just talked about in writing, go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Don't write it down. You're going to have it memorized before we're done. Ready? Here we go. Marvel Universe versus podcasters. When I think about Marvel Universe, I think about the story behind the character, the origin story. That story that makes you, that makes me feel more attached to that character, whatever's currently happening with that character, it makes it more interesting. Let me give you some examples. Spider-Man. You know the story? After being bitten by a radioactive spider, high school student Peter Parker gains extraordinary powers and learns the hard way that with great power comes great responsibility. They're setting you up for something. It's got great power, but there's a double-edged sword to it. Iron Man. Billionaire inventor Tony Stark creates a powerful suit of armor to escape captivity and subsequently uses this technology to protect the world as Iron Man. So he's got a job now protecting the world. Captain America. Steve Rogers, frail young man, is transformed into the super soldier Captain America after volunteering for an experimental serum during World War II. That's perfect for the time. Captain America still got him. Not Batman, not Spider-Man, not Superman, but one of the biggies. Thor, The Norse god of thunder is banished to Earth by his father Odin to learn humility, where he becomes one of Earth's mightiest heroes. And who could forget the Incredible Hulk, or just Hulk maybe? Scientist Bruce Banner turns into the Hulk, a powerful green behemoth, after a failed gamma radiation experiment. Don't make him mad. You see different variations of these over the years. There were comic books. The Hulk is a great example. In the 70s, Bill Bixby and the Hulk version of the character, Lou Ferrigno. When I was growing up, we used to watch that, but they all have this same origin story. And there are different variations. I talked about Captain America being in World War II. You're not going to see that mentioned now. There's a modern day version of Captain America. But the bottom line is this. All of these stories are built upon a foundation that makes whatever the character is doing now more interesting. We know how this character happened. We know why this character cares about this thing. We know the importance of whatever's happening. And thinking about this, do people listening to your podcast know your origin story? I didn't mean to do this. This is coincidental, but I mentioned mine earlier. Starting in radio in the 90s. 20 years of broadcast and syndication. 20 years of working in the music industry. 20 years of podcasting. I'm telling that story all the time. That gets you connected to me. I'm not just some guy giving you podcasting advice. I'm a guy who's in the trenches. I've been in the trenches. And if you've listened to Build a Big Podcast before, you probably know how I got into radio. It was a complete fluke. I was a musician. I was going to school for music. I took a radio class because I wanted to play my own music on the radio. Very first semester of college. Professor's like, nope, can't do it. They call it plugola. You might have heard of Playola. It's getting paid to do something. Plugola is very similar, but you own whatever it is that you're plugging. Basically, you can't plug your own stuff on the radio unless that is known that you own that stuff. Anyway, let's talk about your origin story. You need help with one? I can help you with one. Big Podcast AMP, the audio monetization program. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But your origin story, you've probably got an idea for what it is. Why are you talking about building a business? Is it because you built a business yourself and people started asking you those questions? Hey, how do you build a business? That happens a lot. Why are you talking about weight loss? Because you've had success with weight loss, or maybe you didn't have success with weight loss, at least at first. Bring that story in. Let people get connected to you. And beyond the origin story, let people know what's going on in your life. Don't be afraid to share a little bit about yourself. Don't overshare. This isn't therapy. Your audience isn't getting the copay, the insurance payments. Don't dump the therapy talk on them, but you can share yourself. More thoughts on this, the origin stories that I mentioned, they're at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 201. Let's talk about Big Podcast AMP, the audio monetization program. If you like the newsletter, if you like the podcast, you're going to love Big Podcast AMP. That is the audio monetization program that I just mentioned. It's a personal coaching program that's going to help you do three things. 1, grow your audience. 2, get people talking about your podcast. 3, make more money with your podcast and your podcasting skills. I've got all the details at bigpodcast.com/amp. That's bigpodcast.com/AMP. It is a long letter. It is detailed. I want you to know what you're getting into before you get into it. If it's for you, let's make that happen. bigpodcast.com/amp. That's bigpodcast.com/AMP. Sonic Dash, a 48-hour podcasting contest. Silver Sound is an Emmy Award-winning audio production company in New York City. Its first podcast, Aisha, it won top prize at Tribeca Film Festival in 2023. I've worked with Silver Sound before. I've done remote sessions there. I'm in Nashville, got somebody in New York, hook them up via Silver Sound. It's a great facility. They're great people to work with. And twice each year, they've got a 48-hour audio storytelling competition. To win, entrants must complete and submit a totally original, from-scratch audio piece within 2 days of being emailed a prompt. What that looks like is, let's say Monday at noon, you get the email. It's got a prompt in it. You have until Wednesday at noon to put this piece together. It's like a 48-hour film project, but it's for audio producers. It's very fun. This is a great opportunity. It's very similar to what KCRW in Santa Monica did with Radio Race. I've done that a couple times. A lot of fun. You're going to meet a lot of great people. It's called Sonic Dash. It is coming up. I've got the details listed at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 201. 5 strategies for podcast expansion. Total audio consumption among Americans is about 4 hours per day. That has not changed in the last decade. Despite the surge in streaming and podcast, audio consumption time is static. And that raises the question, how can we grow listening? To grow your podcast, you've got to get what people are listening to, more or less, and get them to replace it with what you've got. I've got an article linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue 201. It goes into detail about this. Let me give you the bottom line here. These are my takeaways from it. One is broadening the podcast listener base. The key to growth is to attract new listeners, not just fighting for current ones. We get set in our ways. If somebody's a radio listener, if somebody likes audiobooks, yeah, maybe we can get them to listen to our podcast if we're podcasting about the same thing. But there's a huge opportunity for brand new people who don't listen to audio content, but like what it is that you podcast about, to bring them into what you're doing. So that's one. Integrating video content can attract a fresh audience. That's another thing. Something like Riverside.fm, that's an opportunity for you. Not only for your full-on podcast, but also video clips you can put on social media. Again, we're talking about increasing your listener base. That's the opportunity here. How you do it doesn't matter. Any which way you can. But if we can increase the listener base, if you're doing it and you're telling them where to get you, and that's why I like to have a dedicated subscribe page. If you want one that you can steal, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That's going to get you more listeners. Second thing, earning space in a crowded podcast market. The average podcast listener is listening to 5 shows out of the 442,000 currently being produced. That's a tiny fraction of the amount of content that's available. That's what I just talked about. Securing a spot on a listener's playlist often means displacing an existing favorite, underscoring the intense competition for auditory real estate. How do you take one of those spots? Publish more consistently than what the other person's listening to. If they're going through those other 4 shows and that 5th one's not out because they're, every other week, every so often, if you're there weekly or if you're there daily, you got a chance of getting in there and taking over one of those shows. Your podcast has to be good. It has to sound good. It's got to be good as far as content. It's got to be good as far as personality. And I talked about Big Podcast AMP. It's at bigpodcast.com/AMP. If you want help doing those things, I can help you do it. But the bottom line is you got to jump in, push somebody out of that crowded space, which on average is 5 podcasts for each person listening to podcasts. You want to be one of them. Number 3, focusing on light podcast listeners. These are newcomers to podcast. They're listening to fewer than 5 shows a week, 4.1 shows a week. It's the 2.5 kids thing. If you focus on those lighter listeners, those people who've just gotten into podcasting, we got the holidays coming up, the people who've just gotten iPhones, other things that they are listening to podcasts with, they need content for it. Heard about podcasting, finally got me a podcast player. What should I listen to? They should listen to you. How do you reach those people? What are you podcasting about? Go to where your people hang out. Niche podcasts chasing a specific audience have an advantage in attracting these lighter listeners. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Why is that? Because we know where to go to bring those listeners to us. Talked about a health podcast, for example. If I had a health and fitness podcast, where would I be hanging out? The fucking gym. Especially at the beginning of the year. There are a bunch of people in there that have just gotten Christmas gifts, holiday gifts, things that they can listen to podcasts on, and they are highly motivated to exercise, to lose weight. They are ready for the new year. They need something to listen to. Could be you. And every podcast has something like that. You want help figuring it out? Again, bigpodcast.com/AMP. Number 4, create uniquely compelling content. Podcast success, yeah, there's strategic thinking. Yes, it's unexplored niches. Yes, it's a commitment to quality over quantity. But the number one thing for podcasting success, it's creating an experience. It's something that listeners can't get elsewhere. Maybe that's exclusive interviews. Maybe that's your personality. Maybe that's groundbreaking insights. You've got knowledge that other people don't have. Usually it's because people like you. You've heard of know, like, and trust. That's part of it. Also, though, in podcasting, there's that fourth thing. Do they agree with you? Do they connect with you? When you get that, you can get share of ear. That's what we call it. Those 5 podcasts that people listen to each week, you can be one of them. The fifth thing, embracing retention strategies. Podcast creators must focus on trial and retention on multiple platforms, requiring a blend of innovative content, compelling storytelling, appealing packaging, and a deep understanding of listener preferences. Meaning, how does your audience, or the people you want to be your audience, the people you want to listen to you, how do they consume podcasts? If it's YouTube, go to YouTube. If it's Spotify, go to Spotify. Be where they are. Make it easy on them. This is why I talk about the subscription page. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Again, go there, steal it. Use it for your podcast. Don't say, wherever you get your podcast. You tell them where to go. And it's blankblank.com, yourdomain.com/subscribe. Some people call it follow. If you've got a younger audience, yourdomain.com/follow. Building a loyal audience in a saturated space demands podcasters consistently deliver quality content that keeps an audience. You're trying to build on something. You can't be losing your current audience. You need to retain listeners and also expand upon them. New markets, new listeners. We're all kind of like cigarette companies that our customers are dying off. And I mean that literally and figuratively. People can die, but most of the time people just move on. Yeah, I got what I needed. Don't need to hear this again. Are you constantly innovating? Well, I can help you do that. You want this list? You want the full article with more information? Newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 201. Useful and overlooked skills from podcasting. I love this. People ask, why should I podcast? What do you get out of it? Sometimes you get money. Sometimes you get fame. But some of the bigger things that you get, they're often overlooked. And those are the skills that you can develop. Things like, 1, respectfully interacting with people you disagree with. We'd be in a much different country if everybody were podcasting and had that skill. Learning how to hang with people, man. Have a discussion. Listen to people. Express yourself. Second thing, the ability to have a 10-minute conversation with anyone from any background. You know who's good at this? Hairstylists. Talk about anything. Hey, how you doing? They are good at small talk. Waiters, good at small talk. Cabbies, Uber drivers, good at small talk. It is a valuable skill. Forget podcasting for a minute. If you can get good at small talk, interacting with people that you approach in an office, approach on a sales call, approach for a job interview, you're going to have more success. That's a huge benefit of podcasting. Meeting different people, having different conversations, hearing different opinions. Number 3, getting to the point. I think what helps a lot of people with this, at least if they do what I suggest, which is edit yourself, is you can listen back to yourself and say, well, I don't really need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. Take out big chunks of what's not needed and really tighten up your message. That's going to make you better at getting to the point. Saying a message in 10 words that previously might have taken you 20 or 30 words. Getting to the point is huge. Yet for some reason, you don't hear people talking about this. It's all about fame and money and download numbers. Yeah, download numbers are fine, but being able to get to the point, being able to respectfully interact with people you disagree with, being able to have a 10-minute conversation with anyone from any background, huge. But maybe the best thing, number 4 on the list, diplomatically say no. Are you a yes man? Do you find yourself being voluntold? Getting into things you would rather not have gotten into, but you didn't say no. Or afraid to say no because you're going to piss somebody off. Diplomatically saying no. That's the 4th skill you're going to get. I'm curious about this. I want you to reach out to me and tell me, what useful and overlooked skills have you developed because of your podcast? I probably should do a whole show on this. Maybe I will. Reach out to me via Mastodon, Blue Sky, or Threads. I've got the links at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. I feel like this would be a great episode. What have you learned from podcasting that surprised you, that wasn't about podcasting, that helped you with your relationship, with your wife, your kids, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, boss people on the street, getting interviews. What skills have you learned? I'm going to mark that down. You want the list? Some of these other overlooked skills that you've developed because of podcasting, might not even know about them. You're going to find it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 201. 22 Pixar rules for podcasters. Emma Coates. She did what she calls Pixar Story Rules. They're worth reviewing. Each applies to your podcast and a different aspect of podcasting work. These are guidelines that help you create appealing stories, that help you craft appealing narratives. They help you develop memorable characters. And that means you, maybe a co-host, anybody that you interview, maybe most importantly, they keep listeners engaged throughout each episode. I'm going to go over 3 of them. If you want all 22, I've got them written down. They're at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. The first thing she mentions is you admire a character for trying more than for their success. And I want you to think of this with yourself and also the people you're interviewing. Some podcasters, you might be one of them, and I've certainly been there. We think we have it all together. And I'll tell you how this showed up with me. I mentioned 20 years on broadcast radio. And I'd done radio before this, but this was the big time. I had a syndicated thing. I was excited about it. Music business radio, still in the air. I came in not as a radio host, but as a music marketing guy. At that point, the business had been going on for about 10 years. I wanted everybody to know I am a music marketing guy. I am the guy if you want to get your album to go up the charts. I'm the guy if you want to pack a venue. I'm the guy if you want to sell records. And I was interviewing people that were a lot more well-known than I am and people that arguably have had a lot more success than I have. My first interview, a guy named Des Dickerson. He played with Prince in the Revolution. You ever seen the 1999 video? He was Prince's guitarist, had the Japanese headband. I've interviewed Dolly Parton, Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics, the Doobie Brothers, Richard Marx, Lionel Richie, a bunch. A lot of them household names. So what I was trying to do originally, I was like, well, as a music marketing guy, I didn't want to be known as just the guy asking the questions. I wanted people to know, yeah, I'm in the trenches with you guys because I've worked with some of these people. I was the marketing guy behind them. Anyway, listening back to those old tapes, it makes me cringe because I'm thinking like this is the guy who's trying too hard. Get out there and do your thing. Be yourself. You don't have to have everything perfect. People don't need to know about your success. They just want to see that you are in the trenches doing it now. Number 2, you got to keep in mind what's interesting to you as an audience, not what's fun to do as a writer. Again, she's a storyteller. They can be very different. And those things are very different. I will give you examples. When I started, and this was back in the 90s, had a broadcast show, and this is just local radio. This is a station outside of Memphis. And I would interview bands. Again, I'm a music marketing guy. That's what I've been doing since the 90s. So sometimes I would have bands in there, and they would tell inside jokes. A bunch of guys that were coming through town, they'd make a fart joke or something happened on the bus earlier that day. And even I was like, oh, okay, what? It was funny to them, but not necessarily funny to the people who were listening. And I see a lot of podcasters do that. These inside jokes. Now, inside jokes are one thing if your audience is in on it, but you've got to bring them in with you. I would always tell the bands this. I would say, just because you were involved doesn't make it interesting. And I would tell you as a podcaster the same thing. And same for me. I got to look at that. A lot of times I work with other editors, other producers, and some of the stuff that I think is great, it gets chopped out. It happened last week. Had an executive producer I was working with. I was doing production on this thing, and I was arguably the host. It was a radio show. I had a mention on it, and that got chopped. Wah, wah. Sometimes you're not going to get mentioned. Sometimes your story doesn't get told. But is it in service of the audience? If so, that's a good thing. Number 3, trying for theme is important, but you won't see what the story is actually about until you're at the end of it. Now rewrite. Now she's doing fiction. This is something you can plan. I will say this is how it applies to podcasting. There's the interview you want that you think is going to happen, and there's the interview that actually happens. If it's just you and you're doing what I'm doing now, you've got an outline and you're doing a monologue and you're controlling every single element of your podcast, you can do a little bit more about what she's talking about. And maybe that looks like you go one direction, it doesn't really work, you edit that out, you go a different direction. That's what the editing looks like. It's during the recording and also afterwards when you're physically cutting tape or digital audio, not really tape. Sometimes I say that, people are like, we're not using tape anymore. Are you really using tape? No. Again, insider language, and this is what I was talking about a minute ago. Insiders know when I say I'm cutting tape or I'm rolling tape. If you're a podcaster, if you're in radio, that's what that means. Good tape. No, it's not physical tape. It's a recording. We say roll up the windows, dial a phone. We don't actually dial anything. We press buttons. And are you rolling up the window or are you pressing a button for that as well? We're still taping, even though there's no tape. But back to interviewing. The interview you think you're going to get and the interview you actually get. There are some podcasters, they've got their 12 questions. Question 1, question 2, question 3. And they're going to get through those things regardless. Doesn't matter what you say, they're asking the next question. Then they're the real interviewers, the real podcasters, the real radio hosts, the really skilled people who are doing the same job, but just a little bit differently. And that's listening to what the guest is saying, listening to what your co-host is saying and running with it. Again, the interview you think you're going to get and the interview you actually get. The interview that you actually get, usually better. Let the story emerge. Bring it out. Be curious. I got 22 of these. Those were only 3. You want them? Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That's where to find all 22 Pixar rules for podcasters. Issue number 201. Well, maybe one more. There's a saying about tattoos. Nobody ever stops with one. And I'll ask you this. Could the same thing be said about podcasts? The answer, probably. Nobody does just one podcast. And a lot of people have a lot of podcasts. I've got a joke. It is visual. To see it, you will need to go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 201. But the bottom line being this, nobody ever stops with one podcast. Usually by the time you hear that one podcast, somebody has done 1, 2, 3, several podcasts to get to that point. The podcast you started, the podcast you ended up with, the episode you wanted, the episode you ended up with. That's how it works, man. Again, it's a funny joke. If you want to see it, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 201. Classified ads for you. These are things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast that people care about. Notejoy allows you to simplify your podcast production. It makes podcast production with guests, co-hosts, and producers easy. And I'm talking about the collaboration part of that. Whether you're collaborating in real time or across time zones, Notejoy makes you feel like you were in the same room. I love it. Everybody can edit on a single document. You are literally working from the same page. It works on mobile devices. It works on desktops. I've got a link for you to try it out for free. It is at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Audio Pen, the easiest way to convert messy thoughts into clear text, including podcast outlines. You hit record and start rambling. I love this for ideas. You ever been in a situation walking down the street, think, man, that would be a great podcast episode. If you got Audio Pen, all you need to do, pull out your phone. I've got an idea for a podcast episode. The first part is this. The second part is this. Third part is that. Using the power of AI, it will take all your rambling thoughts. It will outline them. Step 1, step 2, step 3. It's going to give you a nice, clear, concise outline. You can put it in Notejoy, work on it with other people. It is a great tool. You can try it for free. I've got a link for you at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Hey, thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. I've mentioned this a couple of times. If you want to subscribe, and you do, the way to do that is to pull up bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I've got 3 buttons for you, one for iPhone, one for Android, one is an RSS feed. Any way you want this podcast delivered, I deliver it to you. It is free. Every single episode about growing your podcast, getting more people to your podcast, making more money with your podcast, spreading the message that people care about. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. If you want to work with me, I've talked about Big Podcast AMP. That's the audio monetization program. You can find out more about that at bigpodcast.com/AMP. Read the letter. Don't be afraid of it. I know you like listening to audio. Well, I wrote this out because it's important. I want you to know what you're getting into. I do work with independent podcasters. I love working with independent podcasters. I want to help you spread a message. I want to help you make a difference in the world. We've got that opportunity with podcasting. We can literally change the world. not everybody, not all at once, but a few people, and set some great things in motion. If you want to find out more about how to do that with your podcast, this is it. You go to bigpodcast.com/amp, A-M-P. Again, read the whole thing. Reach out to me if you got questions. I will see you there. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. If you subscribed, you did, right? bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I'll see you on the next episode. See you then.
This is the Big Podcast Supercomputer with behind-the-scenes info for podcasters. The original recording for this episode was 44 minutes and 45 seconds. Approximately 15 minutes of tape, roughly 1/3 of what was recorded, has been removed.